Welcome to my podcast. My name is Karina. I come to you from the Pacific Northwest where I live with my partner, our 2 kitties, and 2 adopted Mustangs. Information about the Wild Horse Adoption Program will be in the episode description box. This podcast covers knitting projects, my horsemanship journey, and my other passions like vegetable gardening and bicycling. If you're new here, I hope you find the content interesting. If you're a returning viewer, it's always great to have old friends. The format of this channel typically includes musings on an early walk to the barn to feed the horses, then knitting content, some catch up on the horsemanship journey, and finally more musings or maybe a little bicycling footage if I was lucky enough to get out. Enjoy, and I hope to see you soon. Good morning, friends. It is Friday, April 11th, and I am doing my walk through the house to go out to the barn to feed the horses. Thought I would bring you along with me on this little journey while I get my jacket on. I should say it is April 11th, 2025, in case you stumble across this podcast at some point in the future. If you are watching these episodes, I appreciate your sticking with me while I kind of experiment with format and content. And I think podcasts in general are passion projects, right? So we want to talk about things that we are passionate about. Otherwise, it wouldn't be very interesting, would it? And if you've watched these podcasts, you can tell that I'm an avid knitter. I make a lot of mistakes and I rip things out. And part of that is to give people some encouragement and maybe some feedback about some patterns. Free patterns can be very, very good. And sometimes, especially I think like Tin Can Knits has some free patterns. Barocco typically has a lot of free patterns that are well written. Some other free patterns, maybe the instructions aren't quite as good. Here, I want to show you my socks. These are the Lumi socks. I made these out of self-striping yarn from Freckled Whimsy, and the pattern is in the 52 weeks of stitches. No, 52 weeks of socks. I do not wear these out to the barn. And if some of you, and I'm thinking of Carrie of My Wool Mitten specifically, who I think you do wear your hand knit socks out to the barn. My socks always come back full of hay. And I am wondering, if you do wear your hand knit socks out, how do you keep hay from being all over your house? So what I do is I take off my hand knit socks that I wear in the house and I put on these commercial socks. And the commercial socks do not leave this room because this is also the laundry room. And when I wash them, I fold them and put them back in this, in my kind of sock pile here. Okay, I think I'm ready to go outside. And I am going to point you in this direction so you can see the beautiful Pacific Northwest. You can see that, whoops, I almost forgot to grab the feed. The horses, actually I'm not giving them grain this morning, I'm just taking it out to the barn. Anyway, I'll talk about that in a minute. While I put on my rubber barn boots, it is still very much mud season here. Definite signs of spring. You can see the green trees, buds leafing out. You can see that beautiful, I don't remember what that plant is, but I think, or that tree is the pink one. I think the hummingbirds love it. It might be a red flowering currant. Hope so. So my goal for that garden is to kind of put a screen up for the propane tank. Birds are chirping. My garlic. I think I'm going to, speaking of passion projects, gardening. So this is my very messy garden. You can see some vegetables over there. So some garlic, some beet greens. I think I have potatoes planted in there. And then I have this very messy space with tulip bulbs, and there's some lilies coming up, and there's some kind of a succulent. I think it's a euphorbia. So what I'm thinking is that after all the bulbs bloom, I'm going to pull them out and plant them in that pot where the garlic is. I think that'd be a lot prettier. This little garden is doing awesome. The lettuce has really come up. So I didn't really intend this to be a garden segment, but it's just kind of nice to see all this growth. Some of my overwintered kale's gone to seed. I have plants in that little messy hothouse ready to go outside, which means cleaning up the kale that has gone to seed out there. I like to leave some of it because the pollinators really like it. Not sure if you can see the raspberries leafing out and the apple trees leafing out. Anyway, passion projects. Well, I've just talked about 3 of my passion projects. Horses, knitting, gardening, living in the Pacific Northwest, I suppose, is a 4th one. I thought today I would do a review of podcasts that I watch, a few of them, kind of go through the list of why I like them. I'm still working on the same, 5 knitting projects. I do have some progress to show on the tank top I've been working on, so I'll show a photo of that when I get to the knitting segment. Bragi is having a trailer loading lesson today. He's really making a lot of progress. And what else has happened this week since I last spoke to you? I had to drive down to the office yesterday, which is about 50 miles away. It can take an hour and a half to 2 hours. Well, good morning, Oh. I left the office around 11 because I primarily work from home. That was part of the agreement when I took this job, and it took less than an hour, so that's ideal. But that is traffic patterns in the Puget Sound. Good morning, Oh. Bragi is in his stall. Hard to see a bay horse in a dark stall. But how about if I get to feeding you boys? All right, we'll talk soon. Hey friends, pardon my messy office. I am not working today. I hope you notice this knitting bag right here. This is the bag that my poncho is in, and I work on that like a few rows if I have a Zoom meeting where I don't need to participate. I just need to be present and listen. Or I need to take a break. Sorry for the very bright light. Because I am talking about podcasts today, I wanted to share my indoor garden, because one of the podcasts I'm going to talk about, I learned a lot about indoor gardening. And you can see I have a couple lemon trees. There's artichoke down there. There's some dill that needs watering. There's tomatoes here with some blossoms on them, which I think I need to open a window to get a breeze so that pollination occurs. There's a little cucumber right here. This cucumber is from Territorial Seed, and it is intended to live its life in a small pot in an indoor garden. These lights haven't come on yet. They're all on timers. And you can see this pepper, and there's actually a pepper there. So this set of peppers isn't doing so well. Maybe I need to transplant them. And there's a few things I'm behind on. There's some basil, another cucumber. So I could, and more peppers. I probably could spend some time transplanting this weekend. So Friday is my day off usually, and today that is the case. So maybe I'll do some of that today. Hey friends, speaking of gardening, and there's a shot of my breakfast in this image as well. While I was heating up my oatmeal in the microwave, I went outside and picked a bunch of kale from that shot that you saw earlier. And I put it in this plastic bag that has been washed out and reused at least 100 times. And in that bag with the kale, I put in a squeeze of lemon. This is a seedless lemon from Costco. Some olive oil, also from Costco. This video is not sponsored by Costco. Some salt, also Costco. Well, Costco supports this household for a fee, of course. And then I smushed it all together. And this is going to be my lunch. I will add some Greek olives from Costco, some feta from Costco, some diced red onion, and maybe a little leftover yellow pepper, which also could be from Costco. We went to Costco recently, I should say. We go frequently. We go maybe once or twice a month. Anyway, Randy came up with this recipe, and to do it in a plastic bag, which I thought was very clever. So I thought, well, that will be my lunch today. So this should be the end of the garden segment, and I will carry on with a knitting and podcast review. Talk to you soon. Hey friends, welcome to the knitting portion of my podcast. I want to share with you this sweater. This is the Calliope sweater that I made out of 2 skeins of fingering weight by, I have to look at my notes, who the yarn dyer is. It's Ray Witterman, and his company is called Nativity, I think. So yes, Nativity. This yarn is, he hand dyes several batches of yarn, and if you subscribe to his blog, you can see his colorways. And I fell in love with this pale blue, and I held it double with a strand of fingering weight that was roughly the same color. And it's probably a Barocco fingering mohair is what I'm trying to say here. I like this sweater. It's boxy. It's meant to have very long sleeves all the way down, kind of, down past the thumb. I don't like them that long, and I didn't have enough yarn for that, so I made them kind of 3, well, maybe, I don't know, elbow length. I don't know what you call those. Not even quite 3/4 length. It's a bit big for me, so I have been tempted to frog this sweater and re-knit it so that it fits me better. We'll see. I have enough projects on the needles right now, so I'm not thinking about that, but it has been on the back of my mind. It does, it falls nicely. I like the way it falls, but I think I would be happier with it if it came to, if it had several inches. I'm holding like a handful of fabric in the back, and then not quite so loose here. I feel like I just dropped something, perhaps not. So It's very warm because of the mohair. Even with fingering weight yarn, the mohair just really makes things warm. The other thing I could do is make another, if I frog this, I could make another love note sweater. I do have one that I knit out of a single skein of fingering weight yarn held with mohair, and it fits very nicely. So I could certainly do that again. I will share a couple projects, works in progress that I have. I mentioned on the walk to the barn that I still have the kind of the same 5 projects. Yes, 5 projects going, and I'm knitting a little bit on them every day. I was just looking at the skylights, looking at the weather. It's cloudy out right now, so hopefully not raining for Bragi's trailer loading lesson later today. Anyway, I was only going to show projects where I'd made some significant progress on. So I'll show you the float tote. So I'm doing a float tote, MCal. It's not an MCal, it's a crochet along. And this is Knitty Natty Love and Stitches. So right now I am doing the yarn cups. So this is the latest one, and it's a size J crochet hook with 2 strands of cotton yarn held double. So this is the striped one out of my 3 main colors. I have a gray cotton yarn that I'm kind of thinking of incorporating into it. So my next yarn cup, I think, is going to have a gray base, maybe with this kind of variegated, light variegated, and then the lavender. And here is a lavender yarn cup. So the idea is that you hold if this is for color work, or where you are on using a project that uses several different colors of yarn, or separate skeins for whatever reason, or separate balls of yarn, you can put them in these cups, which attach to a tray, a crocheted tray, via magnetic snaps. And it helps keep your yarn from twisting about and getting into be a big mess. So I have a 3rd cup in here. Oh yes, I did a marled one. It's pretty. So I could do, at this stage, I could do the 3 or the 5 cup float tote. I am leaning towards the 5 cup, although I can't think of a time that I have knit with more than 2 or 3 colors at a time. Still, I have enough yarn for that much, so I may as well. So this is the float tote. And if you check out Knitty Natty's YouTube channel, her YouTube channel is one I plan to review today. You can also join this crochet along if you like. It started April 4th and goes to the end of the month. There are prizes. I'm not sure how much I'm going to participate in that piece of it. It's just fun for me to do this, and it's motivation to just keep working on a project that I might otherwise set aside. The other big news, and I took a picture of myself that I will put in this video somewhere, this tank that it's a vine tank by Seedling Stitch. The pattern is very complex. I don't think it needs to be this complex. So let me take the cable needle out of it. It's a very pretty pattern. It calls for cotton yarn. I am using a nylon acrylic blend. And what I have done, if you've seen this before, you'll know that I have knit the panels. So it's 4 panels. The front and back panels are exactly the same, which I think the pattern would be a lot more helpful if it just said that. And you knit the 4 panels, you knit 2 of the left and 2 of the right, and then attach them so that they go in the right direction. So in other words, so this is I have this marked as the left front, and then you put a right, you put the right leaning one attach it to the back, and the same. So this is the right one, you put the left one on the back. So it's exactly the same back to front. And so I tried it on and it fits. I'm happy about that. So highly recommend, if you don't have these, having this kind of nifty cable that just slides on, sticks to the end of your needles, so you don't have to put it on waste yarn and then restring it. So you just put this on both needles and it sticks really nicely. So I mean, you can pull it pretty hard and it doesn't. I mean, you should be careful, because in the way that I pop them off, I just kind of use my fingernail and scrape them, but it makes trying things on way handier than putting things on waste yarn. Cats are running around being hopefully silly towards each other and not mean, because if you watched my episode last week, they were having one of their squabble fits that we just don't know why it happens. Probably some resource guarding their brothers, their litter mates. And then once in a while they just have to squabble about some sort of resource, whether it's space. They appear to be a little bit jealous of each other. So so there's not peace in the household. Anyway, so this has been a lot easier to knit since I started, since I joined it in the round. What I would do if I were going to knit this again, and I think I would rewrite the pattern that just says knit 2 left panels, knit 2 right panels, attach a left and a right, attach a right and a left, and join in the round. First attach the left and the right and the left at the shoulders. Easy to do. Super, it's 17 stitches across, so it would be so easy to seam this. And then just join in the round. I think that would be super simple. That's what I would do. I'm going to tell you, I told you what the yarn was. It's a Barocco yarn, probably a sport weight or a light DK. The needles are Addies, and they are a size 3.25 millimeter. So super happy with this. Looking forward to wearing this. There's cabling, but it's very simple. It's just typically one stitch. Another funny thing about the pattern is that it basically has you knitting a lot of purl stitches on the right side and a lot of knit stitches on the wrong side. So I just reversed it. I think I'm going to be a lot happier with that. And then of course, when you join in the round, it's all stockinette. So those are the knitting projects. I want to get to the podcast review. So I am going to I'm going to be looking at my computer so that I have notes. I basically grabbed 2 from each category that I watch podcasts in. So 2 knitting podcasts, 2 horsemanship podcasts, and 2 gardening podcasts. Hopefully, since I reminded myself of that, I won't need to look at my computer too much. So the first knitting podcast that I want to, and you're probably aware, I'm a big fan of this. Before I go into that, one thing I just really wanted to remind you of, and I should have said this at the very beginning, is that the goal of this podcast is hopefully for you to take a break, have something nice to drink. That's why I remembered. It's like I'm still drinking my tea. And then work on a project, or I don't know. Okay, my camera just stopped. So we'll carry on. Fortunately, I noticed and stopped talking, but I keep looking at my computer unnecessarily because I know what podcast I'm going to talk about. I am going to talk about the Bakery Bears. I have been watching them for a number of years now. I started watching podcasts during the pandemic, I'm pretty sure. I think a lot of people started watching podcasts during the pandemic. I used to, when I knit, just watched TV. And then I started knitting in the morning before work. Part of that was because Randy kept getting up earlier and earlier, and I didn't need to get up that early. But once he's up and, he's moving around the house, getting ready for work, I just decided I was going to use that time to knit and have a cup of tea before I needed to get ready for work. And somehow I stumbled on the Bakery Bears. I want to say the first knitting podcast I ever watched was probably Arne and Carlos. And why don't I start with Arne and Carlos, since they are the first podcast that I remember. Arne, if you're not familiar, Arne and Carlos are two, they're knitwear designers. They live in Norway. They are gray-haired gentlemen, had long careers in the fashion business and started designing knitwear. And they do a lot of colorwork patterns. They have done brioche, and they are highly amusing. So, and the podcast that I started watching was called Sit and Knit for a Bit. And the idea of that podcast was that the viewer would sit and knit for a bit, and they would talk about whatever was on their mind, which they are kind of freeform podcasters. Sometimes they have, like, especially around Advent season, it's very structured. But normally they just start talking about whatever's on their mind, and they also do knitting tutorials, which I have learned a lot from. I learned how to knit left-handed from them and do the Norwegian purl, which I think is quite a bit better for my hands ergonomically. So Arne and Carlos sit and knit for a bit. Another one I started watching around that same time was the Bakery Bears, and I honestly do not know how I found them. It could have been a connection from another podcast that I was watching at the time. I don't really see a connection between Arne and Carlos and the Bakery Bears. It could have been just a recommendation that came up because YouTube does that. It's like, well, if you like this podcast, you should watch this other one. That is very likely what happened. The Bakery Bears is a British couple. Roughly my age. Arne and Carlos, I would say, are older than me by a couple of years, especially Arne. Carlos is probably younger than me. And then the Bakery Bears, Dan and Kay Jones, I think they're just a little bit younger than me, but, middle-aged, solid middle-aged. And theirs is very much a lifestyle podcast that I enjoy very much. Dan is a knitter. He's not as prolific as Kay. Kay is the knitwear designer and designs a lot of socks, shawls, and blankets. I would say blankets and socks are her main pattern designing. She does not knit garments, whereas Dan likes to knit garments. They both knit cowls. Dan seems to have ambitions to be like a BBC travel host. His portions of the podcast, which are usually something about historical England, I get the feeling he might have been an educator in the past. He's very outgoing and gregarious, and also a very good host and narrator of his part of the podcast, which is, again, a historical piece of England, which I find fascinating. Kay is an expert in the domestic arts, so baking, cooking, yarn dyeing. She had a series one year that was Kay's Cozy Kitchen, that it had recipes anywhere from like spaghetti bolognese to, I'm not sure, maybe meatloaf or something like that. She recently did Kay's Classic Bakes. That could have been last year, so it was more cakes and things like that. I typically don't, use her recipes, although I think it's fun to watch people in the kitchen. By the way, that was another thing that I used to like about Arnie and Carlos. They changed their format somewhat, but they would have cooking projects, and Carlos was clearly the cook, and Arnie was clearly the person who maybe got in the way a little bit and probably had cleanup duty, but his skill set was not cooking. The other thing I like about the Bakery Bears is that if you are a patron, I am, you get a lot of value for the content that they provide. They have an online magazine. Sometimes it has a pattern in it. Kay designs sock and blanket patterns specifically for patrons. She also has her for sale patterns, but she does not sell the patterns that are for patrons specifically. And they make it very clear. You can be a patron. I think it's silver, gold, and platinum typically get or maybe it's just gold and platinum, I'm not sure, that get the patterns. But you can be a patron for a short period of time and have access to the 4 patterns that she designs for the patrons for the whole year. So I think that's a great deal, and I love her sock patterns. I'm not particularly as fond of her hat and mitt patterns or cowl patterns. I have a favorite cowl pattern designer, and that's Stephanie Lofton of Telly Bean Knits. She does more of kind of a mini poncho cowl that sort of fits. It fits a lot closer around the neck than the typical kind of tubular cowl. All that to say, the Bakery Bears, they publish basically a 2-hour podcast every 2 weeks, and then they also have the patron-only podcast, which is once a month. So very enjoyable, especially if you are a Britophile like I am. I love many things British. So that is also a great podcast. The other podcast, I said I was going to do 2 knitting podcasts. Well, I was going to do 2 of each. So I'll leave it at that. I did Arnie and Carlos, and I did the Bakery Bears. Maybe next week, if this is still something that's on my mind, I'll talk about a knitting podcast that inspired me to start my own podcast. And that is, I will mention it and talk about it next week, and that is Knit All the Yarn podcast. Okay, on to the Horsemanship podcast. Ryan Rose, and I thank one of my viewers who recommended Ryan Rose. Ryan Rose is a Midwestern horseman. He was trained by natural horseman Pat Pirelli, who was getting his start. No, he wasn't getting a start. He was gaining a lot of recognition when I started my horsemanship journey. Oops, I just had this weird pop-up, so apologize for that. Well, I started my horsemanship in the mid-1980s when I worked for a horse trainer. I was cleaning stalls at a stable in exchange for riding lessons, and I started working for a trainer there who was more of a traditional trainer. And there was Pat Pirelli, who started really thinking about horsemanship from I would say from the horse's point of view. And there were he developed these, I think, 7 games that you can play with a horse on the ground, and it really taps into their thinking side, and having them more emotionally and psychologically connected. At the time, it was too new for me to accept, and it wasn't widely, at least in the circles I was in, it was not widely accepted at the time. There was a lot of negative reinforcement training in traditional horsemanship, and I think there still is, where there's a punishment, and the reward is the release from punishment. I think there's a lot of animal training and probably even human behavior specialists who would argue that that's not particularly effective, and it's a lot more effective if you can get someone on board, someone or something. But I'm going to use someone like as your dogs, your horses, maybe even your cats. I think it kind of works if you can get them on board psychologically and emotionally. And when punishment is the part of the method, I think it builds resentment and probably clever ways to get out of doing something. I would argue that someone is not psychologically or emotionally on board with you if punishment and criticism is a primary mode of communication. And that's what training is communication. And Ryan Rose has, he talks about horse psychology and horse personality a lot, and he understands behavior, which I think is really difficult for humans to do unless you make it a study, because horses are large animals and potentially could do a great deal of harm, not necessarily intentionally, although there are some aggressive horses that do resort to biting and kicking and shoving and stuff like that. But most horses are wanting to be cooperative, they're peaceful animals, and they are more likely to run away in fright and fear. And sometimes if they are completely startled, they lose track of what is immediately around them, and people can get hurt. So horses can be very intimidating. Ryan Rose is an expert in understanding their behavior and teaching them ways to feel more secure and confident and develop a relationship with their human. So it's great. I'm a patron of Ryan Rose, and I do participate in the monthly challenges for patrons as much as possible. And I do communicate with him through the patron messenger app when I have specific questions about my own horses. The other one I listen to a lot, and I've listened to them for a long time, and it's more of an audio podcast, is the Horse Radio Network. I've been listening to them since 2014. I think I started listening to them on the Apple podcast app I used to commute to work by bicycle. And so I would listen, like I'd have one earbud in while I was riding and the other ear, not the ear out, but I didn't have the other earbud in so that I could listen for traffic and other necessary things when you're on a bicycle. And I started listening to that podcast at that time in 2014. So it's been 11 years. They occasionally do video podcasts for special occasions. Like they usually have Radiothon around Thanksgiving. It was started out as a 12-hour audio event, and I think last year it might have been 6 hours, and I do believe that one was on camera. So it was a video. But there are a number of horse-related episodes. I think there are maybe 17 episodes a week released, and I can't keep up with that. I can barely keep up with the main ones that I like. I typically like the Horses in the Morning, which is a daily episode. It's an hour long, and there's a couple more that I like. Sometimes I listen to retired, what is it? It's the retired racehorse radio episode occasionally, even though I don't have thoroughbreds or any other type of racehorse. I have Mustangs. And the other one I will listen to occasionally is Heels Down Happy Hour. It's more about showing, English style showing, although one of the hosts is a Western trainer. Sometimes I listen to that. And one of the hosts is the wife of a well-known eventing trainer. Doug Payne is the writer, and Jessica Payne is his wife. So sometimes listen to that, but I'm just not really into that high level eventing or anything. And then one of the hosts is a journalist from Florida. She has a great style and does more. She does, I think, hunter jumper shows. I think she has done some eventing, some low level eventing, just more committed to showing than I am. I just for the most part like to have fun and would like to start having fun with my horses again after my shoulder heals up. I am meeting with the surgeon on Monday. I'm making great progress with physical therapy from my injury from January 10th. Just a little update in there, but hope to have some good news about being able to start riding now that the weather is getting better. Again, checking the weather out there. Okay, so those are the two horsemanship ones. The two gardening ones. I mentioned in the previous clip, I showed my indoor garden. I learned a lot from Callie Kim Garden and Home Do It Yourself. These links will be in my show notes that you can check them out. Callie Kim and her husband live in Southern California, I believe in Simi Valley, which is a little bit west of the San Fernando Valley in the Los Angeles, Ventura area. Los Angeles, Ventura, what else is over there? Thousand Oaks, that area. So much longer growing seasons, frost-free for the most part. So a lot and much different issues to deal with gardening-wise than I have up here in the Pacific Northwest. But she has a really good segment on indoor gardening, and I hope you can see from the clip that I have learned a lot from that. I have set up just that small area just for, that's Herbert. He's out of food and would like me to know. And I do harvest lettuce indoors and stuff. I've moved a lot of that stuff outdoors now, and it is adjusting from the stable indoor temperature to the outdoor temperatures, and it doesn't look very happy right now. But also you can see from the kale that the kale is very happy outside. So I'm just hoping to grow some tomatoes and basil and peppers and tomatoes and the lemon tree indoors. That's my primary goal, and then I'll move everything else that's not those outside. The other one I watch is GrowVeg. Excuse me. And it is, again, a British one. Ben, I forgot his last name, has gardening, a lot of good gardening tips, a lot of raised bed gardening and just succession planting. His climate is similar to the Pacific Northwest, so not particularly hot summers, long and rainy winters, and some frost. So I get a lot of value of the timing of when he plants and moves things out of when he harvests something and then puts something else in. I don't have I just have the one big raised bed kind of at the near the entrance to the driveway. It would be great to have a lot of other raised beds, just haven't got to that point. We have talked about putting in like the big steel stock tanks. I know that's a style. We have talked about doing that. We just, quite frankly, haven't done it. And I've just, I do a lot of growing in containers so I can move stuff around. And that is part of my plan, is to start putting things, out in the sunny spots. Right now, everything that's growing out there is definitely cool weather vegetables that you know, they suffered a little bit over the cold spell that we had, and then it just came back gangbusters. So hopefully keeping ahead of the slugs. So that's my podcast review for this week and my knitting projects. I may pop back in with a little update about Bragi's trailer training. He's been doing really well. We're just taking it very, very slowly so that he can understand and accept being in a confined space, which is frankly weird for a horse. So we have to teach him things. And, you know, part of the reason of this podcast is to, I mentioned earlier that this is a passion project, and caring for horses in a responsible and thoughtful way that helps their experience, their life experience, if you will, is definitely something I want to advocate for. I still see in too many examples of horses as being commodities, and they suffer for that. And whether that is in, you know, a big industry, for example, the racehorse industry, or maybe the reining horse industry, reining as in R-E-I-N, the reins. So there's this kind of Western discipline that's, or the dressage industry, you know, whatever it is, or even backyard horse people, thinking of their horses more as commodities and to be put away like a bicycle in a garage and then taken out when it needs to be used again, rather than thinking about its daily needs for health and happiness. And I truly believe that happiness for all of us is important for our health. I think I'll end it on that note. Sound good? All right. I will see you next time. Take care.